Welcome to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Howard, and today our guest is Matt Dunlop, Group Director of Sustainability and Decarbonisation at V.Group. But we are mostly discussing his role in the development of guidelines around ammonia as a fuel for shipping as a secondee to the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Decarbonisation. Let's get straight into it. So Matt, welcome to the podcast. Please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about your career path and current role.
Thank you, Gary, and I appreciate the invite. So I'm Matt Dunlop. I'm Group Director for Sustainability and Decarbonisation at V.Group. The listeners may understand what V-Ships is. We're one of the largest leading ship managers globally, but we're also one of the leading service providers in the maritime industry as well. I'm a master mariner. I was 16 years at sea, came ashore in the late 90s. I started as a superintendent and various positions leading up to the head of ship management for the group over the last 28-year period with V.Group. My responsibilities at V.Group, clearly decarbonisation is the main focus, but I've also got responsibility for corporate governance, including climate-related financial disclosures, the strategy for decarbonisation for V.Group, fleet, as well as our customers. Looking back over my 40 plus years involvement in shipping, there were some challenging times. However, being involved in shipping has given me a real opportunity and it's a real privilege. I didn't realize it at the time, but it certainly was. And clearly with my new role, I'm not done yet. So there's some left in the tank, Gary.
And bringing a wealth of experience to that role as well, by the sound of it. What's the right phrase? On secondment to the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping?
That's correct. So back in 2021, round about the time of COP26, which was ironically hosted by the Glasgow team, we as V.Group identified that decarbonisation and sustainability was something that we really needed to focus on and take control of. My role then was the group director for HSSEQ, and the E in HSSEQ, the environmental aspect, was covered, but we really needed to focus our energies into more about the E and the S and the G, and therefore my new role of Group Director of Sustainability and Decarbonisation was formed. At the same time, we realised that the sheer scale and the difficulty of the decarbonisation challenge was the driving force behind V.Group's engagement with the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. This is the biggest transformation that our industry will ever see, and we recognise that we can't do it on our own. So we needed that expertise in order to have a full understanding of the complexities, the challenges, but more importantly, the solutions. I'm part of the onboard vessel solutions team at the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, which is known as the Centre, which includes personnel from a range of complementary disciplines such as ship owners, charterers, main engine manufacturers, energy efficiency solution providers, and class societies. The team also works closely with others at the centre, such as fuel and energy teams, another economic analyst team, macroeconomic approach to the energy transition, focusing on issues such as GDP and the outlook for shipping at each of the IMO's target dates along the path to 2050. It's really exciting to be part of the solution for the industry, and at the centre we show the world it's possible. Practically, as a secondee, I'm in Copenhagen every other week, focusing on onboard vessel solutions and, more importantly and specifically, ammonia as an alternative fuel. Working with the team in Copenhagen is a real privilege. It is the most qualified network in the world, and again, to be part of that is quite exciting.
And thank you for coming along and giving us a little bit of a peek behind the curtain there. The toxicity of ammonia makes it perhaps the most talked about of the alternative fuels that the maritime industry is looking at. The toxicity side of things is a relatively novel concern when it comes to ship operations and bunkering. What sort of training requirements are being considered to ensure that seafarers remain safe operating and bunkering ammonia-powered vessels?
This is probably one of the most important elements that I'm working on, and it's safety. Safety for crew, safety for stakeholders involved in onboard management of the ships, port authorities, line handlers, pilots. So it's really a wide network. The real challenge here, as you mentioned, is toxicity. And you may also ask, why are we looking at ammonia as an alternative fuel? Well, obviously because of the low emission properties of ammonia, and also it's scalable. So therefore, we need, as an industry, industrial scale of ammonia as an alternative fuel to be available globally. So that's the rationale why we're focusing on ammonia. But the safety aspects, we should not underestimate. In my opinion, the ship designers and the naval architects, the main engine manufacturers, etc., they'll come up with the technological solutions. That's happening as we speak. What's not ready yet is the regulatory minimum standards for seafarers to be upskilled. We started back in May 2022 working with the Lloyd's Register Decarbonisation Hub and the human factors specialists at the centre. And basically, we focused on understanding the competencies and skills that are required for addressing the training competencies for onboard safe management. And that includes the likes of fuel storage, management and transfer of fuel on board, gas purging from compartments and venting, leak detection, isolation, repair. Maintenance is going to be a huge challenge because obviously the biggest risk to seafarers is leakage and being exposed to leakage. And therefore, today's maintenance standards and processes and procedures is going to be different from those elements when we're introducing ammonia as a fuel. And importantly, emergency response, how to look at contingencies on board for leakages, looking at exposure levels and collisions, groundings, what we do if cargo tanks are breached, etc. So emergency response is a big part of that. Again, I mentioned that upskilling of our seafarers is one of the biggest challenges. And we're addressing that today at the centre, focusing on specific competencies and training that really need to be addressed at IMO level and STCW, etc. And we're in good shape, but we really need to focus and provide comfort to the industry perception of ammonia as an alternative fuel. To be able to qualify ammonia safely is our ambition.
And this is all really being done sort of against the clock, right? I know Euronav and CMB Tech have a series of ammonia-ready vessels on the order book, and I believe the last one of those vessels, which are already on order, is due to be ammonia-capable at delivery rather than just ammonia-ready. Plenty of other ships in the order book besides. When does the centre expect to have these training guidelines and broader regulations in place?
So we would regard those organisations who have ordered ammonia-fueled ships as first movers. And that is so encouraging to decarbonisation ambition. As you mentioned, the first ships deliver in the water 2025. First main engines should be available 2025. There's ready pilots underway in various main engine manufacturers. Regulation, ships in the water and the practical guidelines are all at different maturity stages. And therefore, we need to work with all aspects to ensure that we are aligned and we're collaborative and we're complementary to each of the other functions. As it stands today, ammonia as a fuel is not permitted as a fuel because of the IGC and IGF code. However, we're also working in that where the subcommittee of the carriage of cargo and containers should be ready by September this year, and they'll provide interim guidelines. But get back to your question, when is the competence and training projects going to be delivered from the centre? We are aiming for the end of this year, and we're also working alongside the Maritime Just Transition Task Force because that is complementary. We're working on the standards of competence and training, and the MJTT are focusing more on the materials. And again, we're aiming for the end of this year. in order to propose this to IMO at a later stage, early 2025.
What is that path forward from the guidelines and project outputs to ultimate inclusion in STCW, for example?
It's critical. Our ambition is to deliver, along with the MGTT, our proposal, and that should be submitted to the International Chamber of Shipping ahead of the Human Element Training and Watchkeeping Committee around about February 2025. And there'll be a formalized, put this through as an agenda item through the MSC and IMO for interim guidelines, hopefully issued within 2025. The next STCW review is 2027, however. The interim guidelines will be sufficient prior to then.
And then just reflecting on the process as it stands at the moment, how important is your own experience as a seafarer when it comes to guiding the creation of these rule sets?
I believe that it is so important to not just have empathy with my seafaring colleagues, but to have the knowledge and capability to represent them at the most senior levels, ensuring that we provide the necessary upskilling and training required for them to carry out their duties safely.
I think there's a lot that comes from knowing the realities of life on a ship rather than just being a career regulator, right?
Indeed, absolutely.
We spoke before about the first movers in the ammonia space, and some of these companies will obviously be competitors to one another. How willing have you found that companies are to collaborate on the decarbonisation space, and what role does the centre play in enabling that collaboration, do you think?
Yeah, we recognize that at the early stage, that collaboration with the industry is critical to the success of our decarbonisation challenge. And the exchange of ideas and know-how that such partnership fosters is seen as one of the cornerstones of shipping emissions to decarbonise. However, as you mentioned, our industry is not renowned for sharing information, which previously may have elements of competitive or commercial advantage. We are making headway, however, and we're seeing a lot more industry collaboration because no one has got the premium over safety. And therefore, understanding what class societies, IACs, SGMF, bringing the whole holistic picture together is critical. And therefore, collaboration is one of the most fundamental challenges and solutions to our decarbonisation ambitions.
And does V.Group have its own competitors as well with positions within the centre?
We have two other secondees similar to myself. So we've gone into this with an open book. We need to ensure that the competitiveness or commercial angles is removed. We're going in here to encourage collaboration, provide data from the 600 ships that we manage, anonymize data to protect our customers and ship owners and charterers, etc., to enable decision making at IMO for the likes of the carbon intensity index, making sure that at the next revision of the CII, the data that we've gathered and produced over the last 12, 18 months can actually ascertain the effectiveness of CII and what we need to do to make it more meaningful going forward. So we've got a real role to play to ensure that this is focusing on the ambitions of the centre and the ambitions of our industry to decarbonise, and there's no competitiveness whatsoever.
There must be a lot of lessons being learned at the centre as well. How does your work there feed back into V.Group, and how do you think V.Group's work helps to inform and guide the work at the centre? What's that exchange like?
So the engagement with the centre is a two-way street in terms of the flow of information. I have to extract value from the centre so that I can understand it and share it with my colleagues or customers and industry peers and stakeholders. Conversely, I focus on adding value to the work of the centre by contributing skills and knowledge as well as V.Group's range of specific competencies. While the perception of the centre might be that it's primarily a science-based research and development incubator, we at V.Group add an important dose of pragmatism to the workflow. And I can ensure that the science is actually fit for purpose in a live setting on board ships. and ask, what does that mean for seafarers and for safety management systems? And how can we upskill our crew for the greener fuels of the future?
Again, showing that value of real world experience in these conversations. Just finally, I know there's a V.Group product in the works that's relevant to this conversation. I think I first heard about this during a conversation on EU ETS at CMA Shipping with one of your colleagues. Could you tell us a little bit about Verde and where it fits into V.Group's decarbonisation strategy?
Indeed. Integrating climate change and climate strategy into our value proposition goes beyond meeting regulatory obligations. It's a fundamental part of our vision and corporate ethos. By aligning our internal business objectives with climate considerations and delivering best-in-class ESG services to our customers, we're poised to achieve sustainable growth, unlock opportunities, and also generate significant value for our stakeholders. And this conviction has driven us to develop the pioneering Verde service offering, which you mentioned. And this provides a comprehensive decarbonisation service package encompassing performance monitoring, expert consultancy, and energy efficiency solutions for our fleet emission reduction. And basically, we've carved out a team, the Verde team, just focusing on voyage optimization, energy efficiency, transitions, etc. And as you know, improving technologies to drive energy efficiency is the most effective way to reduce emissions, as it focuses on minimizing fuel consumption, and it can contribute 30-40% of the necessary emission reductions. However, vessels will still require fuel, making the development of the new cleaner fuels essential for the remaining 60 to 70%. So we understand that our industry is part of the problem, but we're also part of the solution. And having those necessary skills and competencies that we can provide solutions to our customers is critical.
Matt, thanks for your time today and for appearing on the podcast.
You're welcome, and I hope it's meaningful engagement to the listeners out there, Gary.
I'm sure it will be. Thanks very much. Thank you for listening to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast.